Have you ever heard a sound that shouldn't exist? A voice that hums where no one should be alive? What if I told you that 5 women, identical, silent, barefoot, were once found deep in the Montana woods and then vanished overnight? There are no records, no graves, no trace, only one photograph half-burned, with a single name written on the back. Anna the 6th, November 1978, Platwillow County, Montana. That night, the blizzard came earlier than anyone expected. Snow fell like a wall, the wind carried it sideways, and the forest turned dead and white. But Harold Lynch refused to turn back. He knew these woods, every ridge and hollow. He'd hunted here his entire life. By late afternoon, the sky went completely dark. The compass spun uselessly. His skis sank deep in the crusted snow. He moved almost blindly until, through the swirling white, he saw something impossible. A thin gray line of smoke, straight and steady, rising above the treetops. No one lived out here. The map showed nothing but forest. And yet the smoke kept climbing, stubborn and deliberate, as if someone wanted to be found. Harold reached the hill and saw it. A roof sticking out from the snow. Not a cabin, not really. More like a house buried into the slope, half underground. A single metal pipe poked through the ice, trembling in the wind. He brushed frost from the door and knocked. Silence. He tried again. Nothing. When he pressed the handle, the latch gave way, and a wave of warm air drifted out. First, nothing strange. Wooden walls, the smell of smoke, a few old objects. Then, from deeper inside, a faint sound. Not music, not a voice. Something in between, a low, wordless humming. He took a few careful steps. The flashlight trembled in his hand, cutting through the dark hallway. In the next room, 5 women sat on the floor, all wearing gray dresses, all barefoot, their faces pale, waxy, almost identical. They rocked in perfect rhythm, humming the same single tone, eyes half closed, as if caught in one shared dream. It looked like one woman multiplied 5 times in different ages. Harold froze. He cleared his throat, trying to speak. "Hello?" he whispered. No one answered until the youngest, maybe 14, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were wide, light, and empty. She stared at him as if looking at something that shouldn't exist. The others kept rocking. The humming grew sharper, almost a scream. Harold stepped back. The air in the room changed, heavy, metallic, wrong. The smell of smoke disappeared. He turned and ran. Behind him, something hit the floor. A dull, heavy sound, but he didn't look back. He burst outside, the door slamming shut behind him as the wind howled. By morning, the storm was over. Harold was found near the road, half frozen, whispering fragments of what he'd seen. 5 women, same faces. They looked, but didn't see. Sheriff Douglas Hanson and 2 deputies followed his trail. They found the cabin, a few miles from the northern forest line. The chimney was still warm, but the inside, cold, empty, silent. Ashes in the stove, a bowl of porridge left unfinished. A strange metallic odor in the air. On the walls, only dark rectangles where photographs had once hung. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, almost all gone. Only one lay on the floor near the fireplace, covered in gray ash. A young woman, delicate features looking slightly to the side, as if someone had called her in the moment the photo was taken. On the back, written in pencil, one uneven line. Anna the 6th. The sheriff arrived before sunrise. The storm had cleared, but the air still carried the smell of ice and smoke. Deputy Ford found the cabin first. The same one Harold described, half buried in snow, the chimney blackened, the door cracked open. They entered carefully, rifles ready. What they found didn't look like a crime scene. No blood, no struggle, just absence. Beds neatly made, plates stacked on a table, still warm to the touch. Someone had been here only hours ago. Sheriff Hanson walked through the narrow hallway, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. In the main room, he saw it. A single chair overturned beside the fireplace. On the wall, faint marks where photographs had once hung in tight rows. He counted the nails. Dozens. Maybe 100. Every one empty. A notebook lay half-hidden under the ashes. Old, with a leather cover, the first pages soaked through and frozen together. Inside, short sentences written in a tight, deliberate hand. Dates going back 20 years. He flipped through carefully, whispering as he read. First generation complete. Subject 12 survived cold exposure. Anna's breathing steady. Eyes luminous under low light. Ford looked at him. Jesus, what is this, sir? Hansen didn't answer. He kept reading. The final line before the ink ran out said, "When they glow, we'll know the blood is pure." In the back room, they found a trapdoor beneath a rug. The hinges were stiff, frozen in place. When they pried it open, warm air rushed up, mixed with something else, copper, decay. A narrow staircase led into the earth. The basement was lined with jars. Rows and rows of glass containers, fogged from the inside. Inside each, something small, gray, twisted, like shapes that once were human. Some had hair. Some had teeth. Hansen stepped closer, the beam of his flashlight trembling. A tag dangled from one jar, Specimen A3, female. At the far end of the room stood a single metal bed. Chains hung from the frame, the leather straps still buckled. A woman's shoe lay beneath it, small, old-fashioned, covered in dust. On the wall above the bed, a child's handprint, smeared in something dark. Ford whispered, "This isn't a house, it's a lab." They sealed the cabin and called the bureau. By the time the first agents arrived 2 days later, the site had changed. The jars gone, the notebook missing. Even the prints in the snow had vanished overnight, covered by a fresh layer that fell from a clear sky. Only one thing remained, a photograph, wedged behind a beam near the stairs. A man in his 40s, eyes sharp, wearing a military coat with a faded emblem. Underneath, written in the same thin handwriting as the notebook, Dr. Abraham Lovell, Project Northern Line. The Bureau analyzed what little they managed to recover from the cabin: fragments of paper, a few samples of ash, and the remains of a burned notebook. Under ultraviolet light, faint words appeared between the scorched fibers. It wasn't a diary. It was a research log. The first entry dated back to 1954, signed by Dr. Abraham Lovell, Air Force Medical Division. Title: Human Adaptation to Cold Environments. He wrote about testing the limits of endurance in sub-zero conditions: skin reaction, metabolism, oxygen deprivation. There was nothing unusual until the word volunteers disappeared from the reports, replaced by subjects. Then, abruptly, the official entries stopped. No record of resignation, no transfer. Dr. Lovell simply vanished from the military database in 1956, along with his wife and 2 daughters. The next surviving page of the journal picked up a year later, written in the same meticulous handwriting but in a different tone. Colder, detached. It read, "The mountain preserves them. The body hardens here. The mind becomes quiet. They no longer fear the snow." Over time, the language changed completely. Equations and data gave way to strange observations. Lines about purity, lineage, and the chosen flesh. He began calling his daughters the carriers. At first, the notes described simple endurance training, exposure to cold, fasting, breath control. But the next pages blurred the line between experiment and worship. The children endure without complaint. Their eyes reflect the northern light. The younger one prays even when I'm silent. The process must continue. Only through their wombs will the line survive. The handwriting grew uneven, almost frantic. Paragraphs spiraled into fragments. Replication achieved. Anna responds best to isolation. Their features align. The same symmetry, the same silence. Then, one line written across 2 pages, carved deep into the paper. When they start to glow, we will know the blood is pure. Investigators traced Lovell's background: born in Kansas, educated in Chicago, recruited into a classified Arctic survival project. After his disappearance, several colleagues reported receiving letters from him, pages filled with sketches of human skulls, veins drawn as constellations, and a recurring symbol. 6 circles forming a spiral. They thought he'd gone insane. But in one letter, he mentioned something else: the Hollow Creek Refuge, a place where the cold never ends. No one ever found that location on any map. By 1960, all contact with the Lovell family ceased. Neighbors reported that the doctor's cabin near the border stood empty, windows boarded, the ground around it frozen year-round. Then, in 1978, 20 years later, the smoke appeared again. The same smoke Harold Lynch saw in the storm. The Bureau's final analysis stated, "All recovered evidence suggests Dr. Lovell continued human experimentation in isolation, using direct descendants as subjects. The number of individuals unknown." But one agent, reviewing the material late that night, noticed something the others missed. On the back of one photograph from the file, faint pencil marks formed a date: March 12, 1979. That was 3 months after the cabin raid. And below the date, 4 words, almost invisible under the dust: Anna gave birth again. What do you find when you dig beneath a house built to hide? What happens when a scientist decides the human body isn't finished yet? And how far would someone go to create their own version of perfection? 2 weeks after the initial sweep, the Bureau returned to Hollow Creek. The second team had one task: document every inch of the property. No assumptions, no theories, just evidence. The cabin structure looked ordinary until they examined the back wall of the main bedroom. The wood sounded hollow. Behind a layer of insulation, they uncovered a sealed panel, reinforced with resin and nails driven from the inside. Once removed, it revealed a narrow passage descending into stone. The space beyond was nothing like a basement. Concrete walls, a single light fixture, and steel shelves along both sides. The air was heavy with the odor of formaldehyde. There were jars, dozens of them, some labeled, some blank, all sealed tight. Inside, fragments of what appeared to be biological tissue, preserved for study. None of it catalogued, none reported anywhere. On a rusted table lay pages covered in numbers and notes, patient codes, temperature logs, sketches of bones and eyes. Every page signed the same way: A. Lovell. Pinned to the wall was a chart showing 5 vertical lines connected by arrows, each marked with a name: Mary, Ruth, Elizabeth, Helen, Anna. For lines ended in red ink. The 5th stopped halfway, unfinished. The agents followed the passage deeper, where the floor turned to packed earth. There they found a secondary chamber, a wide tunnel supported by wooden beams from an old mining system. In the center were 5 bodies positioned side by side. For female, 1 male. No signs of violence. A single metal cup nearby tested positive for cyanide. Identification matched the remains to Dr. Abraham Lovell and his 4 adult daughters. Anna, the youngest, was missing. The evidence suggested a deliberate act, a planned end to the family line. But the notes contradicted that idea. The last entry in Lovell's recovered pages read, "Subject Anna remains viable. Continued isolation recommended." Photographs taken at the site show disturbed soil leading toward an adjoining shaft. The tunnel was partially collapsed, no exit located. Search efforts covered 3 miles of abandoned mining corridors but produced nothing. No additional remains, no artifacts, no footprints. The final report closed the Hollow Creek file for the time being. Officially, it was classified as a group suicide following genetic experimentation. Unofficially, several agents disagreed. The evidence didn't align. Too much missing data. Too many open files marked with the same handwriting. And one more photograph, recovered weeks later from a private collection, reopened the question entirely. It showed a young woman standing beside a mountain road, date stamped April 1979. She looked identical to the others, same face, same gray dress. But the note on the back said, "Anna, alive." In the years that followed the Hollow Creek discovery, the Bureau closed most of its field activity. The Lovell case was archived as resolved, though several agents quietly admitted it didn't feel finished. There was no record of Anna's body, and no clear timeline explaining what had happened after the supposed group suicide in the mine. Then, in February 1984, a report came in from the state of Idaho. A child had been found alone at a rural bus station on the outskirts of Pocatello. She was small, about 4 years old, wearing a thin gray dress despite the cold. No shoes, no luggage. The station clerk said she'd been standing near the vending machines for hours, silent, not crying, just watching people. When local police arrived, she didn't resist. She let them lift her up, eyes half closed, as if she were waiting for it. At the hospital, doctors found no signs of injury. Her health was stable, though she seemed undernourished and extremely sensitive to light. She didn't speak a single word. When they asked her name, she only turned her head away. Child Services gave her a temporary name, Ellie. Fingerprints and photo identification were sent to the Bureau as a formality. No one expected a match, but 2 weeks later, one arrived. DNA analysis connected the child to the Lovell family line with near certainty. The test was repeated 3 times. Each result was identical. The Bureau reopened the Hollow Creek file. Agents compared Ellie's mitochondrial DNA with samples recovered from Dr. Lovell's remains. The relationship showed direct descent. Not grandchild, not distant relative, but immediate lineage. There was only one possible conclusion. Ellie was Anna's daughter. She was placed in foster care under supervision. Over the next 5 years, several families tried to adopt her. Each attempt ended abruptly. The child would stop eating, sit in silence for hours, and according to one foster mother, wake up in the middle of the night and stand in the hallway for hours as if listening. Psychological evaluations described her as non-responsive but observant. Doctors noted unusual symmetry in her features, almost unnerving perfection, and rapid tissue healing after minor injuries. In March 1991, Ellie was moved to a long-term care home for children with developmental disorders near Spokane. Security there was minimal, the building old, the funding limited. One morning, staff entered her room and found the bed empty. The window was open. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, but no footprints led away from the building. Local police reviewed the only working security camera near the entrance. At 3:14 a.m., the tape showed a woman standing by the gate. She wore a long gray dress and no coat. Her hair was tied in a single braid. The child appeared beside her, holding her hand. They didn't speak. They simply turned and walked into the snow until the camera's view ended. The footage was later enhanced by the Bureau's forensic unit. The woman's face was partially visible, features identical to Ellie's. Age estimation software placed her in her late 20s. That detail shouldn't have been possible. If correct, it meant the woman could have been Anna Lovell herself. Witnesses from nearby houses confirmed they'd seen 2 figures walking down the road that night. One neighbor said the woman stopped under a streetlight and looked directly toward his window. She didn't move for a long time, he told investigators. She just stood there watching. Then they were gone. No trace of Ellie or the woman was ever found. The case remained open under the name The Missing Girl of Hollow Creek. The last line in the Bureau's 1992 summary reads, "Subject remains unidentified. Possible recurrence of Line A. Surveillance recommended in northern regions." Throughout the 1990s, the Hollow Creek case existed only as a file number, forgotten by the Bureau, dismissed as an unfinished report from another era. Then, slowly, the sightings began. In 1993, 2 hikers reported seeing a group of women standing near an abandoned mine entrance north of Flotillo. They claimed the women looked identical, dressed in long gray dresses, watching silently from the edge of the trees. When rangers investigated the site the next morning, they found only footprints, all the same size, barefoot, leading toward the forest and vanishing among the pines. Over the next decade, similar accounts appeared across northern Montana. Fishermen, hunters, and travelers described the same figures. Women of varying ages but with identical faces, moving in small groups at dusk, sometimes near the lakes, sometimes along the frozen ridges. Local newspapers began calling them the Sisters of the Woods. At first, it was treated as folklore, ghost stories told around campfires. But then photographs surfaced. In 1999, a tourist from Seattle developed a roll of film after a hiking trip near the Clearwater Reservoir. On the final frame, partially obscured by glare, were 4 women in gray, standing knee-deep in the water. Their reflections in the lake showed 5. In 2003, a group of university students exploring the old Flatvilo mines stumbled upon a sealed chamber. Inside, they found a crude altar, stone blocks arranged in a circle, surrounded by dozens of burned candles. On the wall hung black and white photographs of the same faces repeated over decades. Women, children, all with similar features. Above them, carved into the rock, was a phrase written in Latin, "Sanguis meminit," the blood remembers. The students turned the evidence over to local authorities. The chamber was secured, cataloged, and sealed again under federal supervision. No one publicly confirmed the discovery, but the story spread online. Forums began linking it to the old Lovell file, calling it proof that the bloodline had survived. In 2007, miners working a new exploratory site west of Hollow Creek unearthed another cavern. This one contained medical equipment, rusted tables, glass jars, and surgical tools consistent with 1950s laboratory design. Among the debris was a single file cabinet, its papers mostly destroyed by moisture. One document survived enough to read, "Project Northern Line Generation 4. That same year, residents from 3 nearby towns reported hearing what they described as chanting late at night near the lakes. Most dismissed it as echo from machinery or distant trucks. But the Bureau quietly reopened a low-level inquiry under a new title, Operation Hollow Line. When agents returned to the old site in 2008, they found the original Lovell cabin gone. The foundation dug out, the ground smoothed as if erased by hand. Satellite images showed faint circular marks where the structure had stood. In the center of those markings lay a single wooden cross made from 2 planks nailed together. Attached to it was a metal tag. The tag bore one word, etched in small, careful letters, Anna. 3 months later, a new report arrived from Canada. A freight train operator passing through the border town of Del Bonita noticed something walking along the tracks before dawn. A group of women in gray dresses, all the same height, moving in a single line through the fog. Security footage captured them for exactly 12 seconds before they disappeared behind the snowbanks. The last frame showed one of them turning her head toward the camera. Her eyes appeared faintly luminous. The footage was reviewed, verified, and classified. The file was reactivated under a new name, The Daughters of Hollow Creek. June 2011. Glacier National Park, Montana. A forest ranger named David Harrow was conducting a routine inspection of restricted territory near Hollow Creek. At 5:47 a.m., he radioed the station. "I'm seeing people out here. A group, female, not moving." The transmission ended abruptly. Search teams reached the location 2 hours later. In a clearing near the edge of the forest, they found a perfect circle burned into the grass, roughly 10 meters across. Inside the circle stood 7 women, barefoot, facing inward. At the center lay the body of a young girl. No signs of violence except for shallow markings carved into her forearms, a repeating symbol resembling the number 6 written in a spiral. All 7 women were unresponsive, appearing in a trance-like state. Their clothing matched historical descriptions from the Hollow Creek case. Long gray dresses made of coarse linen. When approached, they turned simultaneously toward the investigators but made no attempt to flee. Their pulse and temperature were normal. Their eyes were described as unusually reflective. The deceased girl, estimated age 15, showed no evidence of struggle or trauma. Her blood, however, exhibited an anomaly that halted the examination entirely. Under ultraviolet light, it emitted a faint blue luminescence, not a reflection but an internal reaction. Lab reports later confirmed no known chemical or biological cause. Within 48 hours, the FBI assumed jurisdiction. The operation was codenamed Northern Line, the same title found on Dr. Lovell's documents decades earlier. The 7 women were transported to a classified medical facility in Washington state. Their DNA matched the Lovell mitochondrial sequence with near-perfect accuracy. Each carried a distinct variation of the same genetic marker, one that appeared designed, not inherited. Agents returning to the scene uncovered a series of shallow caves nearby. Inside, they found makeshift sanctuaries, walls lined with photographs of identical women spanning decades, candles melted into the stone, and traces of medical equipment corroded by time. Among the debris lay surgical scalpels, syringes, and metal trays engraved with the initials A.L. One wall bore a Latin inscription, Linea Borealis, the northern line. By August, the Bureau had confirmed at least 12 such sites across Montana and Idaho. Each contained evidence of recent human activity: footprints, candle wax, and fragments of bone. The connection between the groups remained unclear, but the genetic data suggested a single source. On September 2nd, an internal memo circulated through the Bureau's medical division. It summarized all findings from the investigation up to that point. The report contained one highlighted paragraph, a note from Agent Wright, who had overseen both the Hollow Creek recovery and the current operation. It read, "The results are consistent with accelerated cellular replication patterns first documented in the Lovell line. The female subjects exhibit synchronized biological cycles and active hormonal alignment consistent with gestation. Their structure remains stable. Their behavior remains calm." And then, below the printed summary, handwritten in pen, one final line: "They are breeding again." In January 2014, St. Helena Regional Hospital in northern Montana admitted an unidentified woman during a snowstorm. She had no identification, no medical record, and refused to answer most questions. When asked her name, she replied once, quietly, "Anna." She was approximately 30 years old, thin, with pale skin and abnormally low body temperature. Within an hour of arrival, doctors determined she was in advanced labor. The delivery began at 2:18 a.m. under the supervision of Dr. Lauren Patel. Complications arose immediately: weak pulse, erratic contractions, and almost no bleeding despite full dilation. At 3:02 a.m., the infant was delivered stillborn. The staff noted the skin had a faint bluish hue that appeared to shift under the fluorescent light. Attempts at resuscitation failed. The child was pronounced dead at 3:11 a.m. The mother showed little reaction. She stared at the ceiling for several minutes and then whispered something that the nurse could not understand. When Dr. Patel returned with the chart, the woman repeated the words clearly. "She's not dead. She's the Dawn." Standard procedures were followed. The child's body was transferred to the hospital morgue for autopsy. The mother was stabilized and kept under observation. She refused food, spoke little, and occasionally asked if the others had arrived. When questioned, she gave no explanation. That night, at approximately 1:40 a.m., security cameras recorded two unidentified women entering the hospital through a side door. Both wore long gray dresses and head coverings that obscured their faces. They moved directly toward the morgue. The footage ended when the hallway lights flickered and went out for 11 seconds. When power returned, the cold storage drawer containing the infant's remains was empty. No forced entry, no sign of struggle. The following morning, the woman who had called herself Anna was found unresponsive in her bed. Vital signs were absent. Toxicology showed no foreign substances. The attending nurse stated that her body temperature at the time of death was 23 degrees Celsius, far below survivable limits. Yet there was no sign of hypothermia. Within minutes, faint condensation formed on the window near her bed. Not from heat, but from cold radiating outward. A federal agent arrived 2 days later with orders to secure all medical samples. DNA analysis confirmed a direct match to the Lovell genetic line. The child's tissue samples revealed extreme inbreeding, a genetic bottleneck consistent with long-term closed reproduction. More alarming was the mutation discovered in the blood, identical to the luminous compound found in the 2011 Glacier Park case. The material emitted trace bioluminescence when exposed to ultraviolet light. Chemical isolation failed to determine its source. Officially, the hospital's record listed the event as maternal collapse following neonatal death. Unofficially, Internal Bureau correspondence referred to it by another name, the New Birth. 3 weeks later, the morgue's night attendant, who had worked that shift, contacted local police. He claimed to have seen the two women again, standing across the road from the hospital just before dawn. When he called out, they turned and walked toward the tree line. The taller one carried something in her arms wrapped in gray fabric. By the time officers arrived, the snow was undisturbed. No prints, no sign of passage. The Bureau sealed the report, marking it confidential. Ongoing line observation. The final page contained a single handwritten note. No burial confirmed. Subject likely reclassified under Northern Line protocol. By 2016, the Lovell investigation had evolved into a closed federal program. All files were reclassified under the designation Northern Line Division, overseen by a task force operating out of Anchorage, Alaska. The official purpose: monitoring of inherited genetic anomalies in remote populations. In reality, the project's focus was singular: the descendants of the Lovell bloodline. Satellite surveillance identified recurring anomalies across the northern states, thermal signatures in uninhabited zones, short-range radio bursts carrying coded biological data, and irregular power draws in areas officially unconnected to the grid. Every lead ended the same way: abandoned camps, extinguished fires, traces of sterile blood with identical DNA markers. In 2018, a reconnaissance drone captured footage near the Yukon border. The camera followed a faint light moving through the valley, a line of individuals walking in silence, each carrying a small container emitting the same pale blue glow seen in prior incidents. When agents arrived 40 minutes later, the ground was empty. Only heat residue remained, and footprints that matched every known member of the Hollow Creek sequence. The Bureau's internal report described the pattern as migratory. The subjects were moving north. In 2021, an unmapped structure was located under the ice shelf near Barrow. Inside, investigators discovered an active generator, incubator equipment, and multiple metallic pods, each labeled with a Roman numeral. One was open. The interior was lined with cloth. In the center lay an imprint the size of a newborn. DNA analysis from the site confirmed what the agents already suspected. The material inside the pods matched the luminous blood compound exactly. Replication was no longer a theory. It was operational. The final entry in the recovered field journal came from Agent Wright, the same name that had appeared on reports since the 1970s. It was dated March 3, 2022, the day before the division was officially dissolved. Most of the text was redacted, but one paragraph survived. They have reached the water. The ice no longer stops them. The sequence is complete. We were looking for an origin story, but what we found is direction. When the team returned to the facility 2 weeks later, it was gone. No structure, no equipment, no trace. Just a smooth layer of ice stretching to the horizon. The Northern Line file was sealed permanently. No further operations authorized. But last winter, a Norwegian research vessel recorded a faint radio signal off the Arctic coast. A pulse repeating every 7 seconds, transmitting on an obsolete military frequency once used by Dr. Abraham Lovell's team in 1955. Decoded, it formed 4 words: "The blood remembers you."